4, Pasuk Vav, chapter 23, verse 6. We began last week this discussion, which is actually, interestingly, the end of a section here. But it's sort of like a bracket, like this is the other Oreo cookie to the beginning and the cream that we learned we saw in the middle. But on page 434, verse 6 says, Lo sateh mishpat evyoncha birivo, which the English translates as, do not pervert the judgment of your destitute person in his grievance. Okay, don't pervert the justice of the destitute person in his grievance. We could sort of understand his grievance as he's coming, you're one of the Dayanim, and this destitute person is coming, and he's sitting there, and the other person who's his one is the
plaintiff,
one's a plaintiff, one's a defendant. Thank you. They're both sitting there. You look at this poor person, and you're tempted to
give him a break.
Pervert justice, assumingly by giving him a break. Right? You look at him. He's an evyon. He's a poor person. He's a nebuch, and so you look at it and you say, you know what? I'll give him a break. I'll slide him a break, especially if the opposition is a wealthy guy. So I might be tempted as a result of that to indeed, give him a break. The Torah comes along and says, no, lo sateh mishpat evyoncha birivo. Now, this is very nice.
Why does it say evyoncha? It doesn't say ha evyon.
Okay, we're going to come to that in just a minute. Could pick up, and this is a very nice idea. It's a beautiful idea. We're all very happy with it. Justice is justice. Justice is blind. Doesn't matter whether the person is wealthy or poor. Justice is justice. Okay. Now, flip up ahead in Chumash to page 1024. Don't lose this place. That's why you have those blue tags, right? Put the marker there and jump up to page 1024. And on page 1024, which is the beginning of Parshas Shoftim, we are blown away by the following pasuk, which is pasuk Yutes, right? Pasuk 19. What are the first three words of pasuk 19? Lo sateh mishpat. What did we just read? What did we just read? We just read on page 434, Lo sateh mishpat. Right? Hold on a second. So, obviously, there's got to be a reason why the Torah is mentioning both of these places. Yes, it's true, and we'll talk about it. The beginning of Parshas Shoftim, it just says, Lo sateh mishpat. It doesn't describe the mishpat of whom. As opposed to our source, which says, Lo sateh mishpat evyoncha. So not only does it tell us who the person is, but the Torah actually describes him in a way that connects you to him. So why these two phrases?
I'm not sure because my Hebrew is not good enough. The English is translated differently, even though the Hebrew words are the same.
The English says, do not pervert the judgment here.
Which is imperative.
And over here it says, you shall not pervert judgment.
Which is technically a different tense. I don't know if that's intentional or if that's just
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I think it might be because in Parshas Shoftim on page 1024, it's more than simply a declarative statement. There's a number of clauses in it. Don't pervert, right? Don't pervert just, don't favor one side. Don't take a bribe. So because of the fact that it's a listing of things, I have a feeling that's why the English translates it the way that it does, as opposed to our verse, page 434, a much more direct declarative statement and a shorter statement, and a much more one-topic oriented statement as well. So you have that concept also, which is there. Okay, so let's see if we can figure out why the Torah, why HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have told us both of these things. Clearly the message of don't pervert justice in favor of the underdog is a powerful message. It would be equally powerful if it said don't pervert justice in favor of the wealthy person, the political contributor, the one who is going to do something good for you down the road. In other words, both of those sentiments are sentiments that we consider noble sentiments because we understand justice to be not a reflection of your socioeconomic status. Justice is simply a reflection of our best attempt, right? Our best attempt to discover the truth, our best attempt. It's impossible to know the absolute truth. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows the absolute truth, and only HaKadosh Baruch Hu can weigh all of the pieces of the puzzle. Even only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows all the pieces of the puzzle. But we have to do our best. And what is our best? Our best is to go according to the way we interpret and understand justice. So I understand the Torah tells, but why in both places? Why in both places? So if we continue with the theme that we mentioned last week, which is namely lo sateh mishpat evyoncha, that evyoncha is to be translated as a poor person. Don't pervert the justice in favor of or due to the poor person. Okay. So if we understand Evyon in that way, I understand why it might tug a little bit more at my heartstrings. In other words, the Medrash on the beginning of Parshas Shoftim, where it says, Lo satem mishpat, the Medrash there simply says, who are we referring to? We're referring to Ish Ploni Na'eh. What does Ish Ploni Na'eh mean? A nice guy. He's a nice guy. Looks nice, dresses nice, speaks nice. He's a nice guy, right? So I might be inclined. He's a nice guy, and he's farbissina, no good. Not that one's rich or one's poor, but he's a nice guy. I might be tempted to incline, justice in favor of the nice guy, so to speak. So one way to interpret is, Pasuk in Shoftim is talking about, as the Medrash says, the nice guy. Or the Pasuk in Shoftim is talking about the Karov, the family member. That's how the Medrash understands it. It's a difficult Medrash because you're not allowed to serve as a Dayan if one of the litigants is related to you. Go ahead.
Unless the other litigant agrees to take it.
Correct, right, correct. Unless the other litigant agrees, you don't have to recuse. In other words, you're not obligated to recuse yourself. I should say, you are obligated to recuse yourself unless the other party agrees to allow you to sit as a dayan. So perhaps what that pasuk is telling us, according to this medrash, is, listen, even though both parties have agreed, you still in the back of your head might be thinking, hey, he's a karov. He's a family member. He's a shtickle mishpacha. So we grew up together. We went to yeshiva together. We played ball together. We drove trucks together. Whatever it is, he's a shtickle mishpacha. You know what? I'm going to tilt the scales a little bit in his favor. So that could be the meaning of lo satem mishpat and shoftim. It's not talking about somebody who's impoverished, who tugs at your heartstrings because he's nebuch, so poor, and you have a chance to say, you know what? This rich guy's never going to miss the $100. For this poor guy, the $100, wow, it's going to be the lottery. So that could be our pasuk. That's what our pasuk is. Our pasuk is tugging on the heartstrings of rich and poor. But what is the pasuk in Shoftim talking about? So the pasuk in Shoftim might simply be talking about, he's a nice guy, he's a karov, he's family member, something like that. I want to develop this a little bit more. I want to develop it just a little bit more. Richard, would you mind just opening the door so we get a little bit of a cross...
There was an old song my father, of blessed memory, used to sing to me. It's called Open the Door, Richard. I can sing it.
I don't know the melody, but... Okay, all right, there we go. I'm just going to open this one over here so we have a little bit of a breeze coming in, circulating air. Okay, now, so So this is one possible way of looking at this. But there's another way, to build on this a little bit more. I want to share with you a Gemara in Maseches Baba Metzia. Yes, sure. Will you open the door? Why not? Go ahead.
If the poor person is starving and he stole a loaf of bread, did that factor in at all in terms of having mercy for his illegal?
So if the poor person was starving and what he did was a manifestation of his need to survive, so then the answer would be definitely yes. It would be pikuach nefesh. And in pikuach nefesh, most of the laws of the Torah, with the exception of the big three, so to speak, avodah zarah, gilui arayos, and shvichos damim, avodah zarah, sexual immorality, and murder, with the exception of those big three, all the other laws, assuming it's not a time of decree, of shmad, of persecution, all of those other laws fall by the wayside. So if the person is literally starving and he steals a loaf of bread, so he comes before Bezdin, let's say, Bezdin is not going to hold him chayev. Right? Bezdin is going to have to deal with other things, the other things. I don't remember the context of it, but along these lines of the person who came to ask the Rav, and he said to the Rav, I want to know if I can be yotzei the obligation of drinking the 4 cups Pesach night at the Seder with milk. Right, with milk. So the Rav said, he said he had to think about it.
For a medical reason?
Well, for milk, just for milk.
Milk
So instead of wine.
Couldn't afford
Because let's say that you're a person who can't drink wine. Let's say you're, the nitrates in the wine
stomach ulcer.
right, create difficulties for you medically. And let's say you can't even drink the grape juice. Let's say you're a diabetic and you can't even drink the grape juice, not even the low sugar variety of grape juice, right? So you can't drink any of this. So you can you can fulfill your obligation in what's called chamar medina, and what's called the drink of the place, the social drink, right? So it could be maybe orange juice or coffee or tea or something like that.
No, we have a dairy, the whole stuff we have.
So he comes to the Rav and he says to the Rav, can I fulfill the obligation with milk? He was asking the question, is milk considered a chamar medina? So the Rav said, I don't know, I have to think about it. He goes into his study and he comes back out a few minutes later and he says to the man, I want you to know that you can fulfill the obligation of Dalit Kosos with milk. And he hands the man an envelope. And he says, open this up when you get home. The man goes home, he opens up the envelope, and he sees a nice donation. Right? The Rav put a $1,000 bill in the envelope, whatever it is. So the next day he comes to the Rav and he says, I asked you about milk. Why'd you give me $1,000? So the Rav said, if you're asking me if you can fulfill the obligation of the 4 cups with milk, that must mean that you can't afford any meat for your Seder. So if you can't afford any meat for your Seder...
You can't afford the meat.
Right.
What'd you say?
It's not the wine that you can't afford.
Right. So in other words, you have to look, sometimes you have to look beyond, the question. Right? You have to look beyond the question.
Because we have vegetarians and meat, so.
Right, but you do it because of choice. You don't do it. You're not doing it because you can't afford to eat meat. You're doing it because you don't want to eat meat for a particular reason. Okay, so let's come, Michael. How are you? Let's come to the Gemara. It's a Gemara in Baba Metzia, Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph 71a. The Gemara says as follows. Says the Gemara. Where am I? Okay, so the Gemara says. Ika damasne, there are those who teach the following. Aha damasne le lahad Rav Huna. Excuse me, there are those who teach the following statement of Rav Huna. And what is it? It's as follows. Im kesef talva esami, es ha'ani imach. The Torah says, when you lend money to my people, to the poor person with you, so you're not allowed to charge interest. When you lend money to a Jew, you're not allowed to charge interest. When you lend money to a non-Jew, you should charge interest. Charging interest is the way of the world. But when it comes to a Jew who's mishpacha, even if you never met this person before, he's mishpacha, so you don't charge interest. But on this statement, the Gemara says as follows. Says the Gemara, Ami v'nochri. If I have to choose between making a loan to Ami, someone of my people, meaning to a Jewish person, o l'nochri, or to a non-Jewish person, who do I make assuming they're of equal need? Assuming they're of equal need. The Jew is of the Jew is of equal need, the non-Jew is of equal need. I can't distinguish between them in terms of need. They're both of equal need. Who do I make the determination? Who do I lend the money to? According to the Gemara, I lend the money to the Jewish fellow.
Even though you don't,
Right?
Though you don't get
Right? And the Gemara says, well, that's obvious. What are you telling me that for? So the Gemara says, because you might think I'm going to get interest back if I lend it to the non-Jew, so maybe I should lend it to the non-Jew. No, the Torah tells me, Ami. The first priority is Ami, right? You give to the Jew over the non-Jew, assuming they are equally needy. You give to the Jew over the non-Jew. Then the Gemara continues, and the Gemara says, Ani v'ashir. What if I have a poor person and a wealthy person? Now, obviously, when we're talking about lending money here, when we say a wealthy person, why would a wealthy person need to borrow money? Well, wealthy people borrow money all the time for things, right? So I have a poor person and I have a wealthy person, and I might want to argue, and I say, listen, the wealthy person is going to put it to better use than the poor person, right? Or it's a lower risk for me to lend to the wealthy person as opposed to lending to the poor person. The Torah, according to the Gemara, who goes first? Ani kodem. The poor person goes first, because the Torah said, right, im kesef talveh es ami, number one, ami, es he'ani, priority number two, the poor person. Now the Gemara gives another choice. Aniyecha va'aniyei ircha. Poor people, right? Poor gets chosen over wealthy. So now I have poor people who are members of my family versus poor people who are not members of my family. Who do I choose? Who goes first? I lend the money to the poor people who are members of my family first. I'm not sure where the expression charity begins at home comes from. Someone will look it up with Rabbi Google and let me know. But the implications of the pasuk is ami aniyecha, right? First a Jewish person, then a poor person, then a poor person from your family. Now, what about the following? I'm sorry, not a poor person. I skipped a step. The Gemara says, Aniyecha va'aniyei ircha. It's another interpretation of aniyecha, right? What about if I have to choose between poor people in your family, in your town, and poor people in another town? In other words, there are poor people who, let's say, live in Great Neck, who come to me for a loan, and there are poor people who live in Little Neck, or Port Washington, or Roslyn, who come to me for a loan. Who has a greater claim of priority? People in my town, right? So it's interesting because not only does this priority description apply to lending money, but it also applies to giving tzedakah, to giving charity. Right? Everybody has to make triage decisions when it comes to giving charity. It's impossible to give. First of all, we don't have enough money to give to everybody. Secondly, it's not manageable to give to everybody. So how do you grapple with these? So there's a list of priorities as to how you give. The Jewish fellow takes priority over the non-Jewish fellow, assuming they're of equal need. Right? Certainly the poor person takes priority over the wealthy person. If we were to translate that from loans into tzedakah, we would say a person who has a greater need takes priority over a person who has a lesser need. They could both be poor, but this one poor person has a has a greater need, he takes priority over the poor person who has a lesser need, one who's not as poor, so to speak. Now I have two people who are equally impoverished. One lives in my town and another lives in the town across the river. Who has a claim of priority? The poor person in my town. And now, hang on just a second, hang on a second. Now I'm in my town and I have poor people in my family and poor people outside of my family, but still in my town. They're equally impoverished. Who has a claim of priority? Poor people in my family. So
What's the claim?
what's the claim?
You said, who has a claim of priority? How do they have a claim of priority?
Meaning that I need to distribute my charity money. There's got to be some guidelines to how I distribute my charity money. Do I do it?
Okay.
Do I do it? Whoever lines up at the door first? Is that the way that I do it,
No.
or do I do it in different ways? In other words,
I wanted to just understand the word claim.
that's what it means. In other words, has a moral claim, a moral / halachic claim. Okay, interesting. There's something which is not discussed here, right? There's something which is not discussed here, and what is that? People who come from Israel have priority over everybody else, right? So people who are equally impoverished who come from Israel, they have poverty even over my own family members, right? And a nice discussion about why that might be. Now, how does this Gemara relate to what we're talking about? So the Or HaChaim wants to suggest that why do I need a special pasuk of Lo Sateh Mishpat Evyoncha? And this will answer your question, I hope. Lo Sateh Mishpat Evyoncha. Don't pervert the justice of Evyoncha, your impoverished person. In other words, you're already living your life where you know that there are certain priorities when it comes to claims on your tzedakah money. So here you have, you're a judge in a case where it's Evyoncha, right? Who's sitting in front of you? Even if it's a claim of two poor people, but one poor person is your Evyon. Evyoncha, meaning either he's from your family, we dealt with the family issues before, or he's from your town, right? So under those circumstances, you might think, wait a second, the Gemara tells me I have this priority list when it comes to giving loans, when it comes to giving tzedakah. So maybe I think when it comes to administering justice, I also have this priority list. And therefore I have to be more sensitive to his claims over his claims. Just one explanation. This is how I understand the pasuk in Shoftim, which says Lo Sateh Mishpat, and the pasuk here in Mishpatim, which says Lo Sateh Mishpat Evyoncha. What's it adding? What chiddush is it bringing? That even when it is Evyoncha, even when one of the claimants is a person who, by dint of interpretation, has a greater claim to your sensitivities, when it comes to administering justice, that doesn't apply. That's one of the ways of interpreting that. So we've had two ways so far of resolving the question of why it says Lo Sateh Mishpat in these two places, at the beginning of Shoftim and here in Parshas Mishpatim. One is that Shoftim is talking about nice guy, he's a nice guy, or he's my family member, and here we're talking about really the heartstrings. So if I had just been given the pasuk in Shoftim, I might think, you know what, he's a nice guy, but I can't, even though he's a nice guy, I can't tilt the case towards him. And even though he's family, I can't tilt the case towards him. But now, make him an Evyon, make him a poor person, right? All right, that's a whole different story. Then I think maybe I should tilt the case towards him. The second interpretation is Evyoncha, right? It's not just because it's tugging at my heartstrings. It's not just because it's moving my empathy, but Evyoncha is tugging at my halachic heartstrings, meaning that I have a reason to think that Evyoncha, he's my poor person. He's from my family or he's from my town, right? I have a reason to think that maybe he's more deserving of my consideration, and therefore the Torah is very particular to say Evyoncha. So those are two answers. We have a third answer. The third answer is brought down by the Mechilta. The Mechilta is the halachic medrash, and the Mechilta understands it as follows. Says the Mechilta, who here in this situation is Evyoncha? So says the medrash. I'm going to read you it's the Psikta Zutra, not the Mechilta, the Psikta Zutra, who says as follows, Amru Chachamim, the rabbis taught, Af al pi she'ein mikra yotze midei pshuto. Even though generally we do not interpret a verse in other than its simple / literal meaning. In other words, our first allegiance to the translation of the verse is its simple / literal meaning. Could be times where we can't do that, but that's our first allegiance. Continues the Medrash and says, Nidrash evyon b'mitzvos. Here when we talk about evyon, we're not talking about evyon from the perspective of money. Right? Those were the previous two explanations. Here the Medrash says we're not talking about evyon from the perspective of money. We're not saying he's impoverished because his bank account has $10 in it. We're saying he's impoverished in mitzvos. What does it mean he's impoverished in mitzvos?
Not terribly observant.
He's not terribly observant. He might actually be a rasha. He might be a bad guy. He's a machal Shabbos. Let's say he eats treif, whatever it is. I might be, and who's his opponent? His opponent is Belzer Chassid, with a nice beard and a nice hat. So I look at these two, right? Here's a guy who's sitting here in torn jeans and a t-shirt with tattoos, right? And here's a guy who's a Belzer Chassid. I look at this case. What am I tempted to say? Pervert justice. In the other way, by the way. In other words, not pervert justice in favor of the Evyon, right? Which are, that interpretation is, the first two interpretations said, don't pervert justice in favor of the Evyon. Either because he's a nice guy, or because he's your Karov, or because he's poor, or because he's your poor. Now we're talking about don't do it against him. Don't pervert justice could be not just in his favor, but against him. That's still a perversion of justice, right? Don't pervert justice against him because he's an Evyon and mitzvos. It's because you look at him and you say, what are you doing here? What are you doing in Bezdin? Like, when was the last time you walked into shul? Right? So you can't think that way. His claim is potentially as valid as the claim of the Belzer Chassid.
Or even more valid.
Or maybe, in other words, potentially, you have to judge which of these claims is more valid, but they are potentially they are of at least equal value. In other words, we look at the claim, we don't look at the individual.
With this explanation, why does it say Evyon car? It doesn't seem to fit. Because the Evyon car makes a connection between you and the Evyon.
Right, so Mark is asking a good question, right? And this is what, I thought I answered his question before when I said Evyoncha, could be Aniyecha. But here he's saying if we translate Evyon as impoverished in mitzvos, so this becomes a little bit more challenging. Because if he's impoverished in mitzvahs, why is it saying Evyoncha?
Unless it's your fault.
Right? Your Evyon, right? No, but if it's your fault, you might be inclined to, to help him out, right? Not here we're saying, what?
Well, Yisrael are ravens who would do, and if somebody's impoverished in mitzvahs in your community, that can have an effect on the entire community.
All right, so that's a possibility. In other words, maybe, but you're also looking at it from the perspective of, in other words, if somebody's impoverished in mitzvos and the case goes against him, and he could say, why did they judge against me? They judged against me not because of the validity of my claim, but they judged against me because they didn't like my torn jeans, or they didn't like my tattoo, or something like that. That might have ramifications in the community, you're saying.
No, I was thinking more in terms of Evyon Chab, why Evyon Chab. Somebody who's impoverished It's our, we have a responsibility.
Impoverished in mitzvos.
Right.
So, in other words, out of kiruv.
Yeah, and
So I might pervert the just.
his
I might
impoverishment could affect the stock on our community. In other words, because there's a collective,
So if I don't take care of, if I don't take care of the person who is impoverished in mitzvos, you're saying that might.
no, I'm just commenting on why it says that he owns car.
Yeah. So I'm still not sure I understand what you're saying.
Okay, so
Okay.
Can I add to the confusion?
Sure. Go ahead.
I'm a banker and I'm Bank Leumi. So how do they make a loan to a Jewish businessman
With interest.
with interest? Well,
Okay.
that's how they make more money.
Okay, so there are several answers to your question. Not that it's relevant to what we're discussing at all, but that's fine. Still a good, still a good question. There's something called a heter iska. A heter iska is a document that allows the transaction to be transformed from a loan to a business investment. In other words,
Incorporation.
no, it's not an incorporation. Not at all incorporation. Right? It's like this.
Corporation.
You have okay. So forget you have a corporation. Let's deal with how does Bank Leumi lend money to Morris
My
Hotkin?
corporation?
No, to Morris Hotkin on as an individual. A corporation might make it even easier. But how does Bank Leumi lend money to Morris Hotkin? All right. Or for that matter, how does I don't know. Chaim Yankel, who's wealthy, how does he lend to Morris? How does he lend money to you? Okay, so he looks with interest. So he says as follows: what's the principle behind the heter iska? Let's say, what's a normal rate of return on a loan these days?
Depends on what.
Okay, we're talking about not Brooklyn-based, right? What's the normal rate of return?
3-5%.
3-5%, something. All right, 5. Let's call it 5%. Okay, so now I would, under normal circumstances, I lend you the money and you would pay me back the principal plus interest of 5%. But you're a Jewish fellow, so I can't do that. So, but I'm not so inclined to give up on that 5% either. So what do? So I do as follows. I say, you know what, Morris? I'm not lending you this money. I'm making a business investment in you. Let's say your business is ichves. You trade stocks. That's your business. Or you drive a truck. That's your business. Or you have an. Or
I
you.
manufacture widgets.
Okay, you manufacture widgets, and we're talking about you as an individual, not you as a corporation, right? You as an individual, whatever your business is.
Well, you mean, can you lend money to a corporation?
Yes, but lending money to a corporation, it might even be easier because you're not. It's how you define a corporation. I don't want to confuse it that way. I just want to make it so. Let's say like this. All right, I'm Ruvain. You're Shimon. Neither of us have. We're both well. I'm wealthy. Ruvain is wealthy. Shimon is not so wealthy. Shimon comes to Ruvain for a loan. What does Shimon do all day long? All day long, Shimon collects firewood. Goes out to the forest, he collects wood, and he goes around selling the wood. Doesn't have a corporation, doesn't have a secretary, doesn't have a private plane, doesn't have any of these things, okay? So now what happens? So now he comes to me. Shimon comes to me and says, Reuven, could you lend me $1,000? So I look at him, I'm saying to myself, listen, Shimon, I can lend you $1,000, but Charles over there, or I don't know, Vinny over there, right? If I lend money to Vinny, so I not only can I get the $1,000 back, but I can now get $1,000 plus,
The big.
right, plus $50 because I'm going to charge him 5% interest. So I'm going to get $1,000 plus $50 back. Okay, so I might be tempted to lend money to him rather than to lend money to you. However, what do I do? So I now say as follows: I say, you know what, Shimon, I'm going to invest $1,000 in your wood gathering efforts. And here's the deal. The deal is we're now partners. I've invested $1,000. I'm your business partner. As your business partner, I'm entitled to a percentage of your financial gain, and I'm also entitled to share a percentage of your financial loss because we're business partners, right? We're business partners, that's what happens. But in the deal, we say, you know what? I forego my claim to know what you lose or what you gain. I'm not interested. I don't want to know how much you lost this year, and I don't want to know how much you gained this year. The only thing I want from you is you give me 5% of what I lent you, and that will satisfy my return on business investment, my ROBI, I guess, right? That'll satisfy my return on investment. And this way I won't need to know whether you lost money, whether you gained money. It could be maybe I'm entitled to 25% of what you gained this year. I don't want that. I just want 5%. And if you lost money, I don't need to know that either. I'm going to give up, okay? That's a heter iska. That's how loans take place, allowing interest to be charged, because it's not really interest. I mean, it is interest.
Now,
but
let me take it a step further. You're the banker.
you're moving us a step further away from the...
Well,
Go ahead.
no,
This is
but
why it
from
takes
the
2
heter
years
iska.
to get through
Because you borrow money from a bank, they usually want collateral. So you borrow money from the bank and they take as collateral, you have a machine. So now they have to, as Michael knows, they have to file a UCC agreement against that machine, is against the loan.
That's...
So how does that come into the play?
We have, I mean, the Torah talks all the time about taking a mashkon, taking collateral from a
So
person,
that's okay.
from a lender, of course.
Yeah, so okay, fine. So-
Because if these things were not in place, people would not lend money.
Well, that was my whole point. How
It's
could
the
they?
it's the same idea of Prose Bowl. Hillel instituted a Prose Bowl. What's a Prose Bowl? A Prose Bowl is at the end of the Shemitah year, any outstanding money that people owe you is forgiven. So you know what's going to happen? The year before that, I'm going to think that, Shimon's going to come to Reuven and say, "Can you lend me $1,000?" And Reuven's going to say, "Anechdig tug." Right? No way am I going to lend you $1,000 because you're just not going to pay me back. Next year will come, boom, and I'll be stuck for the $1,000 loss. So Hillel came up with the institution of Prose Bowl to address these issues. So there are these things in place.
My
Okay.
issue is how someone could make a loan, and a Jewish banker make a loan to a Jew. There are ways to do it,
Okay.
and he has a security by pledging the machine, et cetera. So,
Right, so I'm not sure whether or not, I mean, there are heter iska documents. I'm assuming, and maybe Michael can speak more to this, I'm assuming that in most cases, the heter iska documents are executed along with all of the other legal documents in that transaction. I have heard stories of transactions that take place and one party claps on the table and says heter iska, and the other party says okay, and there's no official paperwork or anything like that. In reality, whether that happens or not, I'll let Michael answer that question. But the bottom line is the mechanism is in place. Okay, let's come back. Okay, so we've spoken about Evyon as a pauper, as a poor person, as someone who's impoverished. We've also spoken about Evyon here in the category of mitzvos. In other words, he is impoverished in mitzvos, and that might motivate me to tilt the justice or tilt the judgment either against him or, I didn't understand what Michael was saying, but maybe towards him in some way. There's even another interpretation of this, okay? We began this, it's very interesting because what have we spent the last several weeks on? We've spent the last several weeks on mitzvos that demonstrate your ability to defeat your Yetzer Hara. In other words, my enemy's donkey is lost, right? My enemy's donkey is lost. So I might be tempted just to go, where is he? Right? But no, I'm not allowed to do that. I have to overcome my Yetzer Hara and I have to return the object to him. Or a person who I hate or a person who hates me, we learned birth interpretations. His donkey is lying on the ground. Donkey can't get up because of the weight of the burden. I have to help this person in unloading the donkey. I'm not allowed to just walk away. I have to help the person in unloading the donkey. So along these lines comes a beautiful interpretation of the Alshich. The Alshich was a 16th century Sephardic biblical commentator, among other things. He was born in Turkey, ultimately lived in Tzfat. All the good Sephardim ultimately went to Tzfat. And he wrote a commentary on Chumash, and the Alshich says here that what is this? This pasuk is yet another way of helping you fight against your Yetzer Hara. The Alshich says, you know what? It's possible that you're not going to see your enemy's lost donkey. That situation might just not happen. Or it's also perhaps not possible that you're going to come across your person who hates you, you're going to come across his donkey under an unbearable burden. So says the Alshich, this is yet another way to try to defeat that Yetzer Hara. And how does the Alshich do that? He does it by interpreting Evyoncha not as an impoverished person, not as an impoverished person financially, not as an impoverished person in mitzvos, but Evyoncha as an impoverished person when it comes to goodwill between you and him. Meaning that who is he? Who is the Evyoncha here? He's your enemy. Right? There's a paucity of goodwill between the two of you.
It's only going to work if he's a judge. It doesn't really work in other situations.
No, we're talking about I'm a judge. Right? I'm a judge. He's one of the litigants. He happens to be somebody who hates me. Or he happens to be somebody that I don't feel so good about. Right? Or maybe he's my enemy. Whatever it is, I might be tempted to pervert justice because of his position. How will I pervert justice because of his position? I'll say, you know what? He hates me. Or you know what? I hate him because I saw him do something terrible. I can't let that impact on the way I judge the case. I might be tempted to say, you know what? I'm not even listening to what he says. I'm going with this guy. Because look, he hates me, whatever. So along comes the Alshich to say, what does the Torah tell me? Not allowed to do that. That if once the litigant appears before me, I have to completely disregard my personal feelings towards him. In fact, if he is my enemy or he is a person who hates me,
You should recuse yourself.
right? No, Alshich is saying you shouldn't recuse yourself. You should not recuse yourself. What the Alshich is saying is you should use this as a way of battling against your Yetzer Hara. Just like as a Dayan, yes. In other words, just like when you see the donkey of your enemy, the Torah says you have to return that animal. I don't want to return the animal. I don't like the guy. He's my enemy. He's dangerous. Right? Nevertheless, you have to return the animal. Or you see the animal of a person you hate or a person who hates you under the burden. You might tempt, I'm not going to do that. Why am I getting involved in that? Along comes the Torah that says, no, you have to. As long as he's working on it, you have to help him. Right? These are ways of breaking, if you will, the hold of the Yetzer Hara over us. So, says the Alshich, this is yet another way of doing that. You're a Dayan, and who comes before you? Lo and behold, your enemy. Right? Hold on a second. Lo and behold, your enemy comes before you. So this is a test of my Yetzer Hara. Right? I have to not allow my personal relationship with him to affect the way I judge the case. I have to judge the case solely on its merits and not based on what I know about him or what I know about his whoever. Go ahead.
There's a difference. When you take the animal, or you unload the animal, you bring the animal back, you either do it or you don't do it. Here, it's a cognitive thing, and you're working in your head, it's very hard to...
That's the challenge.
But the thing is...
You're absolutely right. In other words, you're absolutely right. It's not like the political show that we saw today, right? The political show that we saw today, was exactly that. It was a political show, meaning the enmity that is there between whatever individuals participated in the circus going on today, right? The enmity that was there, that enmity is still there. Just for the sake of appearances, everybody went out of their way to, right, not allow that to, quote, impact on what we're supposed to do. But if you're a dayan, you have to go even further than that. In other words, it's not allowed to be for show. In other words, if you're a dayan, you have to say, I have to think doubly hard about, what, if I'm going to vote against him, I have to really think doubly hard about, am I voting against him because of the merits of the case? Or am I voting against him because my relationship with him has tainted the way I see the merits of the case? I have to really work hard at that. Granted, by the Al-Sheikh, it's a little bit out of the ballpark, right?
Much easier said than done.
Very much easier said than done. Very much easier said than
In the
done.
Gemara, the opposite, where somebody has done a favor for a judge and he recuses himself because he's afraid that he's going to favor that person.
Yeah, correct.
So here,
Right.
that
Listen, you can recuse yourself, but if you are in the case, in other words, the Al-Sheikh says, use this as a way of growing spiritually. Yes, of course you can recuse yourself, but if you stay in the case, know what you're up against. That's the way the Al-Sheikh is interpreting this. Okay? And the Sforno points out that it's not simply that this lo sateh mishpat is not simply, when I think about the merits of the case, I have to be careful not to be influenced. The Sforno says it goes even further than this. What does it mean? It means that in my courtroom, either both litigants sit or both litigants stand. In my courtroom, both litigants, if they stand behind exactly the same kind of podium. If they sit in exactly the same kind of chairs.
but if one comes in,
Right?
and
If they're at a table, they're sitting at exactly the same kind of the table. And I'm not allowed to listen to one
if the other one's
if the other one's not present.
But if one comes in nice clothes and one comes in beggar's clothes, then that's something that you can't control and still has an effect on you.
Right?
Some
So you have to.
judges wouldn't look at the litigants.
Right, you have to deal with that. But in other words, lo satem mishpat doesn't only mean what's going on in your head, but lo satem mishpat means make sure that as much as you can control is controlled in order to minimize the impact on you. Richard. What if one of the litigants is the melech?
Says, "Lo
So
takir."
very interesting whether or not
We're allowed to judge it.
whether or not you're allowed to judge a king. It's a very interesting question. It's not a simple question. Not a simple question.
We're obliged to.
Because your life might be in danger, right? In other words, it's right. Are you allowed to judge a king? I mean, these are, that's not a simple question, but it's a good question. But the answer is not a simple question, Michael.
Yeah, I was gonna say, doesn't in this Evioncha, in mitzvos, the Evion in mitzvos, but doesn't credibility, nemanus, play a role in the judge's decision making? So in other words,
Ne'emanus from what perspective?
if you have a person, for example, who breaches mitzvos, who does lo sases, and now he's coming up and he's saying, he lent me money.
I don't rely on what he's saying.
It's a
I
witness,
say
that's
so.
what the
Hakira
witnesses say.
is a matter of credibility.
No, in other words, I'm not I have to work. Where am I getting my information
The
from?
witnesses.
These two guys are here, right? The two guys are in my courtroom. Where am I getting my information from? I'm not getting it from them. Why? Because quite frankly, each of them is telling me the story that he wants me to hear from his perspective. Whether he's doing it consciously or he's not doing it consciously. right? Who do I get my information from? The witnesses. So the witnesses have to have credibility. In other words, this guy who is dressed in torn jeans and a t-shirt and a tattoo and 3 earrings and I don't know, you just whatever, right? And I'm not basing myself on what he says.
We don't take testimony from the litigants?
The litigants are allowed in the claim before Beis Din to state what their claim is. In other words, clearly the litigants state what their claim is, but all of my back and forth has to be based not on what he says his claim is or on what he says his claim is, but what proof do you have that is indeed, you're claiming X. What proof do you have that X is true? You're claiming Y. What proof do you have that Y is true? So if I have a guy who's, he's the guy with the jeans and everything else, and he's got impeccable proof to his claim, and the other guy who's a Belzer Chassid has no proof to his claim, there's nothing to talk about. There's nothing to talk about. It's when they both have good proof to their claims, and I have to go, I have to weigh each side back and forth. I'm not allowed to let the jeans and tattoos and rings impact on me.
If there's no aid, but let's say the 2 litigants agree that a loan was made, but they're just differing on the amount, and there's a question of credibility. You don't say that no loan was made.
So this
No, so there are guidelines for a Beis Din as to how to operate in a case where there are no witnesses. In other words,
whatever he
right?
gets to you.
Chaim comes in. He says, "I lent money to Ruvain." Ruvain comes in and says, "I borrowed money from Chaim." Chaim says it was $10,000. Ruvain says it was $100. Ruvain says it was $100. Right? So it's interesting.
If you say that you borrowed but you don't say the full amount, then you have to swear, because it's modem mixas.
Yeah, there's guidelines for this, whether it's
that's
modem
why I
mixas,
swear.
whether it's kofar hakol, right? There are guidelines for this.
Yeah, so that's where
Where there's no edim, is shvua becomes a method of.
that's where the mitzvahs factor.
Ah, so now I
the
say
other person has to swear. That's all.
right. So then you go by the person to whom the shvua means something. It's interesting. You can have claims that are. My son called me the other day about the following situation, and I'm waiting for him to get back to me and share the outcome. A family contracted with a handyman to do some work in their house. The handyman went ahead and did the work. They agreed. Handyman went ahead and did the work. Came time for payment. The handyman gives them a bill for $17,000. Right?
He's pretty handy.
It's a lot of work, whatever. They claim, what are you doing? You told us $1,700. Right? He's claiming $17,000. They claim $1,700. There's no contract, no written contract between them, no edom between them. How do you deal with that case?
You have to see how much work he did and see whether an average person.
It's not an easy, right? There's no easy answer.
So
Right?
wearing your hearing aid?
Right?
Should be easy enough to understand what 1,700 is.
No, but what I'm saying is, so the first thing I said to my son, I said, are these people, the ones who are claiming 1,700, are they ganavim? In other words, are they decent moral people, or are they ganavim? He said, no, they're decent moral people. They really believe that he said $1,700. Right? That's really what they believe. It's not like they're trying to rip him off. They believe he said $1,700. In other words, if he had said $17,000, they never would have used him. If they had heard $17,000, he claims, how could I have done this? I can't do this job for $17,000. The materials alone cost me $6,000. Right?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying, it's just an interesting case where I'm bringing it as an example of a case where people don't necessarily have corroborating evidence to their claims. the handyman is not a Yid, which complicates it even
The
more.
Gemara talks about cases where people bought something that, and from what the amount they paid, you could tell whether they wanted the animal on a saddle or whatever it is.
So I asked my son, I said, go get a psak, and let me, he wanted to know, should he get involved? I said, no. I said, go get a psak. First go get a psak, right? A psak. Go ask a big rabbi, go ask him what the halacha would be if these two people came before him, and then we'll talk about whether you should get involved or not.
Why don't they get two estimates after the fact of what they would have charged? that they-
It's irrelevant. In other words, the people who,
If they get two estimates and they both say 16,000, I understand.
No, in other words, you're saying, Richard, what you're saying is, how could they have possibly thought $1,700 would pay for a job that this guy's charging $17,000 for? That was my question.
Right.
That's why I said to him, I said, are these people ganavim? He said, no, they're very decent people.
Be sincere, but they might have.
They listen. It happens all the time, right? I say X to my wife. She says, "You said Y to me," right? You didn't say X to me. You said Y to me, right? So it happens all the time. You think you said one thing until your spouse corrects you that you didn't say that thing. Whatever it is, it happens. So it could be they really think they heard 1,700, and he really thinks he. What again? I understand, but I'm not bringing the case because I want you guys to paskin on it. I'm bringing the case as an example of what Michael referred to, which is namely you have situations where nobody has corroborating evidence, and how do you deal with that? Richard, you have a question? No?
No.
Okay, go ahead,
But I
Daniel.
mean, the contractor was an idiot for not having anything
They
right.
needed a contract, that's what they needed.
Go ahead.
So two questions. One, the Sforno seems to be describing something that's very similar to actual courtrooms in our civil justice system. Two tables, two chairs, both litigants standing, sitting, whatever the case may be. Does that come from Torah as far as we know?
Look, Michael, can you answer that question? Is there a Judeo-Christian,
More from the English.
more from the English? I don't know.
But the Anglo system is actually different. If there are lots of cases where, like in our system, if someone's already in jail and they're being arraigned, okay, they're going to come out of a certain door with bailiffs or corrections officers, and they're going to be in an orange jumpsuit. But they're going to still stand or sit at the defense attorney's table, which is going to look exactly just like the prosecutorial table. So that bias isn't there. Whereas in the Anglo system, someone's standing in the dock in one corner of the courtroom. Everybody who's in the courtroom can tell that they're the one being accused. There's no.
But this is different, this is one litigant to get
In Massachusetts.
That's not my point. I'm saying that I don't think the U.S. system is so. I understand that in terms of jurisprudence and precedent, that the U.S. system is very much rooted in the Anglo system. I'm talking about the theatrical nature of the courtroom. Sforno's observation, and forgive me, I don't know when in history Sforno was.
It's in the back.
Roughly.
14th century, 15th century. Yes, definitely
So
pre-American Revolution.
The point I'm trying to make is, it very much seems to me that
Check 'em out, yeah,
contemporary
okay.
U.S., the theatrical staging nature of the courtroom is very much in line with what Sforno.
I mean, it could be that this is a moral. In other words, we don't have a claim on the only morality that exists in the world.
100%.
So it could be that this concept is a more universally accepted concept. Okay, anyway, see you all next week. Have a great week. Have a good Shabbos, and